In the 8th century, the city of Thonis-Heracleion guarded the mouth of Egypt's canopic branch. Pharaohs were crowned within these massive temple walls to secure their divine right over the Nile. But a massive seismic event suddenly turned the stable shore. The massive statues and granite columns plunged. This watery tomb hid the glory of Egypt for 1,200 years, until marine archaeologists finally exposed this was Thonis-Heracleion, the shimmering gateway where the ancient world's greatest cultures collided in a dance of gold and incense. For centuries, this metropolis stood as the undisputed guardian of the Nile, a place where every Greek merchant had to bow before the pharaoh's tax collectors and the towering statues of the gods. It was a city of canals and bridges, a Venetian dream of the late period, vibrant with the smells of cedar and papyrus. Yet, even as the priests of Amun-Gereb offered their prayers in the inner sanctums, the earth itself was preparing a final crushing judgment. The ground, composed of unstable sediment and ancient river silt, when the tremors began, they were not the gentle warnings of a minor spirit, but the roar of the deep wanting its earth back. In a catastrophic display of soil liquefaction, the very land turned into water, dragging the colossal granite temples and the thousands who worshipped within them into the lightless, crushing embrace of the sea. What was once the pulse of a nation became a silent, underwater tomb, a drowned memory that would remain undisturbed until we finally dared to look beneath the blue and face the ghosts of our own forgotten greatness. To understand the glory that was lost, you must first smell the air of the city at its zenith. It was a heavy, intoxicating mist, the scent of Lebanese cedar, scorched papyrus, and the sharp salt tangle of the Mediterranean meeting the sweet, life-giving silt of the Nile. Thonis-Heracleion did not just exist, it breathed. Built upon a delicate lattice of islands and canals at the mouth of the canopic branch, it was the gateway to Egypt, the threshold where the known world ended and the mysteries of the pharaohs began. Each morning, the horizon would be jagged with the masts of 100 Greek ships, their hulls low in the water, heavy with wine, oil, and the restless ambitions of men. These sailors, with their bronze-toned skin and bearded faces, stared in awe at the colossal red granite sentinels that guarded the harbor. They were shadows of their own gods, stepping into a land where time felt as thick as the mud beneath their sandals. In the bustling markets, the emporion of the ancient world, the bartering was a rhythmic song. You would see an Egyptian scribe, his eyes lined with protective kohl, and his linen kilt bleached bone white by the sun, debating the price of Athenian silver with a trader from Rhodes. No one passed without tribute. But the true heart of this labyrinth was the great temple of Amun-Gereb. This was the spiritual anchor of the entire delta. Here, under the watchful, stone-cold eyes of the supreme god, the pharaohs themselves would come to receive their mandate of power. It was a place where the divine and the commercial were inseparable. In the shadow of the temple, the Greeks spoke of the hero Heracles, first stepping onto Egyptian soil, and of Helen of Troy, finding a moment's peace before the storm of war consumed her. It was a city of gold and ghosts, a masterpiece of human engineering and divine favor, standing proud on the shifting sands of a river that promised to give, but never promised to stay. Standing atop the white limestone walls of the temple of Amun-Gereb, Pharaoh Nectanebo I looked out over a horizon thick with the masts of 1,000 ships. His skin was the color of the rich river silt, deepened by a lifetime under the African sun, and his gaze was as heavy as the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt resting upon his brow. He was the living Horus, the bridge between the celestial and the mud. In his heart, he felt the pulse of Thonis-Heracleion, the beating heart of trade where the Greek silver flowed as freely as the waters of the canopic Nile. To solidify his dominance over this gateway, he summoned the finest craftsmen to carve his will into stone. They chose a slab of black basalt, dark as a moonless night and twice as hard. This was the stele of Thonis-Heracleion, a monument intended to stand until the stars themselves grew cold. With every stroke of the chisel, the pharaoh declared that no foreign vessel, no matter how laden with wine or olive oil, would pass into his kingdom without paying tribute to the gods and the crown. He believed his decree was etched in the very fabric of reality, a divine law that even the tides must obey. "Let the Greeks know," Nectanebo whispered to the cooling evening breeze, "that even the great Heracles." He stood there, a mortal man claiming dominion over the shifting sands and the restless spirit of the currents. He sought to bottle the wealth of the Mediterranean, failing to see that the very ground he stood upon was a fragile gift from the river god Hapi. Everything they believed up to this point was wrong. The pharaoh did not realize that by anchoring his pride in such heavy stone, he was challenging a power far older than any dynasty. While the scribes recorded his taxes and the priests offered incense to Amun-Gereb, the deep earth beneath the city began to groan under the weight of such arrogance. The silt, deposited over millennia by the Nile's floods, was not a foundation of rock, but a liquid memory waiting to be stirred. Nectanebo saw his city as an eternal fortress of gold and granite, a place where the divine and the commercial met in a perfect union. He did not know that his magnificent stele, which spoke so confidently of eternal order, was actually a countdown. The gods of the deep do not take kindly to kings who think they can tax the world. Even as the Greek merchants complained about the new customs duties, the silent, invisible forces of the earth were preparing a balance sheet of their own. The pharaoh's decree was a masterpiece of law, but the Mediterranean was preparing a master class in erasure. He thought he had built a monument to his legacy, but he had merely given the sea a heavier weight to drag into the abyss. The black basalt was beautiful, but it was heavy, and the earth was tired of holding it up. Under the moonlight, the shadows of the colossal statues of Hapi and Isis lengthened, stretching toward the water like fingers reaching for a long-lost home. The peace of the 30th dynasty was a thin veil, and beneath it, the gods of the abyss were waking up, hungry for the city of gold. The sky did not scream when the end began. Instead, it was the earth that groaned with a sound like the ground. For centuries, the people of Thonis had walked with a stride of granite and gold, forgetting that their magnificent gateway was anchored only by the fickle whims of the river's silt. Hapi, the god of the inundation, portrayed with the swelling belly of fertility and the blue skin of the deep, had grown weary of the city's heavy pride. He had watched the pharaohs preen in their colossal red granite likenesses, and he decided it was time for the Nile to reclaim its tithe. It was the 2nd century BCE when the Great Tremor struck, a shudder that began deep in the belly of the world and raced upward through the canopic branch. Suddenly, the very ground beneath the temple of Amun. In a horrifying instant of divine alchemy, the solid embankment dissolved. This was the soil liquefaction of legend. The firm earth turned to a hungry, churning soup that swallowed the dreams of men whole. I want you to picture the scene. The massive 5.4-meter statue of Hapi himself, carved from the hardest red granite of the south, began to tilt. As the priests watched in paralyzed terror, the god of the flood seemed to lean forward as if he were finally diving back into his watery home. There was no splash, only a sickening, heavy slide as tons of sacred stone vanished into the dark, silt-choked waters of Abu-Kir. The colossal pharaoh and his queen, fashioned in the sacred likeness of the goddess Isis, followed their god. Their royal faces disappeared. Everything they believed up to this point was wrong. The grand temples, once the pride of the Mediterranean and the arrival point for every Greek ship, became mere weights, dragging a civilization into the crushing embrace of the sea. What started as a localized tremor was about to become the final erasure of a kingdom's memory. The canals, which once steered the wealth of nations, now served as the tomb of Thonis-Heracleion. By the time the silt settled, the gateway to Egypt was gone, beginning its long 1,000-year sleep in the cold, salt-stained shadows of the Mediterranean. For 12 long centuries, the Mediterranean kept its secret, a silent tomb of salt and silt, where the Great Gateway was gone, they said. A ghost story told to children, a fable of what happens when a city forgets the weight of the gods. But in the year 2000, the sea finally yielded to the persistence of man. Frank Gaudio and his team of modern seekers descended through the emerald gloom of Abu-Qir Bay, 10 meters deep into the belly of the abyss, and there, the ghosts began to speak. They did not find a scattered heap of random rubble. They found an entire world suspended in a breathless, eternal moment of prayer. It was as if the gods had simply exhaled, and the city had frozen in the middle of a heartbeat, preserved by the very mud that had swallowed it whole. The first to emerge from the shifting sands and darkness was the colossal figure of Hapi, carved from the very red granite of the Nile he once commanded. Nearly 6 meters of ancient power rose from the seabed, his heavy features still bearing the Nearby, a pharaoh and a queen, likely the goddess Isis herself, stood exactly as they had for millennia, their stone eyes looking past the bubbles of the divers toward an eternity only the gods can truly inhabit. Then came the master key to the mystery. It stood upright and defiant, untouched by the corrosive rot of time, its hieroglyphs still sharp and clear, demanding that every Greek merchant pay his golden. It was the final, undeniable proof that the myth was stone, and the stone was the living truth of history. Scattered across the seabed lay 64 ancient shipwrecks, a silent, skeletal legion of wood and bronze, their holds once bursting with the riches of the Mediterranean, now home to the creeping moss and silver fish of the deep. Over 700 anchors rest there still, forever. This is the ultimate lesson the sand teaches us, that the works of man, no matter how grand or gilded, are but ripples on the surface of a much deeper time. We build our towers on the edge of the world and chart our courses through the storms, believing our names will echo forever. But the sea waits with a patience that outlasts every human dynasty. Thonis-Heracleion was not truly destroyed. It was gathered back into the earth, a silver-scaled memory of our own fragility, waiting for us to remember that we are but temporary guests in a world governed by powers far older and more vast than our own pride. The ancient stories still speak to us. Subscribe to tell us in the comments.